Today, we will be discussing the unknown history of America's most important celebration, Thanksgiving. You think you know the story? Watch this video until the end, and you will see that there is more than the harvest gratitude we have always been told. We've all celebrated this yearly tradition and seen this holiday in movies and TV shows. But behind all of this, there is a long and fascinating story that begins long before United States even existed. Before the Pilgrims even came to America, Europe already had celebrations to give thanks for the harvest. In England, Scotland, and the Netherlands, people held festivals at the end of the agricultural season called harvest festivals or harvest home. Churches were decorated with wheat, fruit, and flowers, and neighbors shared food. It was a mix of Christian traditions with older agricultural practices. These celebrations still exist today. For example, in September 2025, several churches and community organizations in London held harvest festivals. It proves these ancient European harvest traditions are still alive, even if they don't have the same cultural impact they later had in America. In 1620, a group of about 100 English colonists, the Pilgrims, set sail aboard the Mayflower. They were Puritans who had been living in the Netherlands looking for religious freedom. The journey was harsh, and when they reached Massachusetts, they founded the colony of Plymouth. The first winter was devastating. Nearly half of them died. But the following year, with the help of the Wampanoag tribe, they learned to plant corn, squash, and other crops. To celebrate the successful harvest, the colonists organized a meal and invited the Wampanoag. It was a moment of cultural exchange and gratitude for survival. The menu included venison, corn, fish, and wild berries. Not the traditional turkey we see today, but this gathering later became the symbolic origin of Thanksgiving. All this is part of the story most people know. But it was most of the colonies that turned it into a larger celebration. In 1759, Rhode Island issued a proclamation for a Day of Thanksgiving, ending with the phrase, "God save the King." During the American Revolution in 1779, John Jay, president of the Continental Congress, declared a Thanksgiving Day in May of that year. The focus was the war effort, and only in second place was the harvest. After independence in 1783, barely a month after the Treaty of Paris was ratified and the new nation was officially born, Congress again proclaimed a Day of Thanksgiving. Once more, the main purpose was to celebrate victory in war. John Hancock, famous for his bold signature on the Declaration of Independence of the United States, proclaimed a Day of Thanksgiving as governor of Massachusetts, following Congress instructions. But now the phrase was different. Instead of "God save the King," it read, "God save the United States of America." After independence, Congress asked President George Washington to establish a National Day of Thanksgiving. Washington signed this proclamation on the 3rd of October 1789, declaring November 26th as a day of gratitude and prayer for the new Constitution and the newly formed federal government. It was not yet a law, nor an annual event, just a one-time celebration, but it set an important precedent. The President of the United States could call upon the nation to give thanks. Other presidents, like John Adams and James Madison, continued this practice occasionally, but it wasn't until nearly a century later that Abraham Lincoln made it a permanent tradition. The young nation had continued to grow. Thanksgiving customs existed, but each state chose its own date, and there was no national consensus. The country's wide religious diversity created a sharp contrast between North and South, and later between the East and the West. In general, these were all different forms of Christianity, but above all, different ways of expressing their rituals. Thanksgiving was not a religious holiday, and that helped it become the most important celebration of the year. Yet Southern states argued that Thanksgiving was the great fast day of the Northern abolitionists. The country was becoming increasingly polarized over slavery. In the South, Thanksgiving days tended to be days of fasting, shared in churches, featuring strong sermons defending slavery. In the North, churches also preached sermons, but their message was completely different. It was abolitionist. Newspapers published the dates when each state celebrated Thanksgiving. The New York Times would publish a list every year, and only northern states appeared because they were the only ones celebrating it. In 1851, something unusual happened. All of them celebrated on the same day, November 27th. Tensions finally exploded. In 1861, the country split in two, the Union in the north and the Confederacy in the south. Abraham Lincoln had to lead the country through this crisis. During the Civil War, he issued two Thanksgiving proclamations. The first one, on July 15, 1863, established August the 6th as a national day of Thanksgiving after the Union's victory at Gettysburg. It was a one-time event, right in the middle of the war. Once again, thanks were mainly given for the war and not for the harvest. The second proclamation happened thanks to a woman, Sarah Josepha Hale, a writer and editor of women's magazines, and the author of a nursery rhyme very famous, Mary Had a Little Lamb. She suggested Lincoln that there was the perfect opportunity to create a true national celebration. Lincoln accepted this suggestion, and on October the 3rd, 1863, Lincoln invited all Americans to celebrate the last Thursday of November as a day of gratitude and unity. It wasn't a temporary date. It was meant to repeat itself every year. It still wasn't a law, but it was the birth of the annual Thanksgiving tradition. For that first year, the celebration took place on November 24th, 1864. It was Lincoln's first and last Thanksgiving celebration as president. He would be assassinated less than 6 months later, just days after the Civil War ended. Let's fast forward 75 years till 1939. That November happened to have 5 Thursdays instead of the usual 4 Thursdays. This meant Thanksgiving would fall on November the 30th, leaving fewer days for Christmas shopping. The country was emerging from the Great Depression. President Roosevelt's New Deal was trying to stimulate the economy. There was an unwritten rule in American retail business: no Christmas shopping until after Thanksgiving. So Roosevelt decided that for that year, turkey would have to be eaten 1 week earlier. But since it was an executive proclamation and not a law, each state could decide whether to follow it or not. Confusion exploded. Political cartoons showed a turkey looking at 2 different dates in confusion. Some states kept the traditional date, November 30th, others followed Roosevelt's new date, November 23rd, and some states, like Texas and Colorado, celebrated twice. This new date, as created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, got to be known as the Franksgiving. So now we had a Thanksgiving and we had a Franksgiving, and basically each state could adopt which one they wanted. In 1940, Roosevelt had other concerns: his campaign for a 3rd term. He won the election on November the 5th, shortly after, when asked whether Thanksgiving that year would fall on the 21st or the 28th, he realized Congress needed to step in. In 1941, Congress decided to end the confusion. In October, the House passed a resolution defining Thanksgiving as the last Thursday of November, but the Senate amended it on December 9th, 2 days after Pearl Harbor and 1 day after declaring war on Japan, changing the word last Thursday to 4th Thursday. Roosevelt signed it into law on December 26, 1941. Since then, Thanksgiving is celebrated on the 4th Thursday of November. Over time, new modern traditions were added. One of them is football. Since 1876, football games have been played on Thanksgiving, and today the NFL schedules 3 games with millions of viewers. Another major tradition is parades. The most famous is the Macy's Parade in New York, which began in 1924. But the first large Thanksgiving parade was held in Philadelphia in 1920 by Gimbels. And of course, there is Black Friday. The term was first used in the 1950s by Philadelphia police to describe post-Thanksgiving traffic chaos. In the 1980s, it became the name for the biggest shopping day of the year. The turkey parting ceremony is a modern tradition. In 1947, the National Turkey Federation began sending a turkey to the White House as a gift for the presidential dinner. But in 1989, President George H.W. Bush decided to spare the turkey, inspired by a story that Lincoln once pardoned a turkey at his son's request. Bush announced on live television that the turkey will not be served for Thanksgiving dinner. Ever since then, every president pardons a turkey, which then enjoys retirement on an outside farm. Although Thanksgiving draws inspiration from harvest festivals, it was never an official religious holiday or owned by any church. From the beginning, it was an invitation to give thanks freely in each person's own way. No doctrine, no single liturgy, no religious institution controlling it. And yet Thanksgiving became a date defined by three major wars. The American Revolution, when Congress declared Thanksgiving days for military victory. The Civil War, when Lincoln used Thanksgiving to help reunify a divided nation. And the Second World War, when Congress made the date official by law. A tradition born from the harvest eventually became the one civic holiday dedicated to something no war ever managed to destroy: family gatherings and gratitude. Thanksgiving didn't begin in America. It began in European harvest festivals, was proclaimed by Washington in 1789, revived by Lincoln during the Civil War, and made law in 1941 in the middle of another war. It has survived crises, wars, and even pandemics without ever being suspended. Beyond the turkey, the parade, and the football, it remains a day of gratitude and family unity.